this. All right, we're recording. Thank you. All right, let me flip this back around. Okay, so excuse me. You guys can kill your cameras here too while we're doing the screen recording, just so your faces don't pop up like on a thumbnail or something on YouTube. So, anyways, starting with the Great Compromise. Ultimately, it's the deal that makes our Congress under the Constitution. Right before the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation, and Congress was kind of I don't know, a free for all, so to speak. And so, Great Compromise is ultimately what creates our bicameral Congress with the House of Reps and a Senate. Anybody, volunteers, people that want to run us through the Great Compromise here before we get started. Ultimately, it's the deal that creates Congress as we know it today. Going once, going twice.
It was a combination of the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, where the House of Representatives is based off population, the Senate's based off of, two per state, no matter how big your state is.
For sure. Okay, great. So that's where we'll start. So again, at the convention, the most serious argument, like Andy told us, is it's not over slavery, right? Which would be like the obvious thing if we walk down the streets of the United States of America and you ask people, well, first off, you probably have people that don't know what the Constitution is, which is embarrassing. But if we ask, hey, what was the most serious spat, the most serious beef at this Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the summer of 1787, you can ask Mr. Raisler about it sometime. It was a wild time. But you'd say, what was the most serious spat? Nobody would say this. Like most people probably wouldn't, unless they've taken AP Gov or had a pulse in school. And so the most serious spat wasn't even over slavery. It was over Congress and its structure. And so like Andy said, when it's decided, okay, we're going to go away from the articles, we're going to create a new Congress, we're going to start with that, right? And Article 1 of the Constitution, I hope you guys are still reading those every night. Taco, I know you're not, because your pocket Constitution, I'm relatively certain, is still in my top desk drawer.
I have two, remember, Mr. Rowe?
Yeah, there's another one sitting on my whiteboard shelf.
Does it have my name on it?
I'm pretty sure it's Jack's, actually, but anyway,
it's not mine.
Yeah, shame on you, Jack.
I have two as well.
Oh, great. Well, I have an extra one. I have like 4 of my own copies. So anyways, and they're highlighted and annotated. It's great. Anywho, when it's decided that, hey, we're going to go away from these Articles of Confederation, we're going to do something to make the national government stronger, give it more teeth, however you want to say it. This, Article 1 becomes the longest because of the importance of Congress and legislative power. And so ultimately what the Great Compromise does is it creates this bicameral 2-house system of Congress where we're going to have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate. The two plans that were proposed initially to create the new Congress, like Andy said, were the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. Virginia plan proposed by James Madison was population, right? Virginia at the time was the most populated state in the United States for all intents and purposes. And he said that representation should be based on a proportion of population, that if you have more people living there, you should have more seats, right? Because under the Articles of Confederation, states could send between 2 and 7 people to Congress. They still only got 1 vote total between the 2 or 7 of them. But anyways, Madison says, no, let's make this proportional. Let's have it based on the population, 1 representative for every so many people, right? We can figure the numbers out later. The small states got concerned about that because obviously if you're a smaller state, like at the time New Jersey was, if you have a smaller population, you will not have as much say in what laws are being created and how Congress is operating. And so you have this Virginia plan based on population, you have a New Jersey plan based on equal representation. And for all intents and purposes, that was the dividing issue. It wasn't slavery. It wasn't, really anything other than that. It wasn't North versus South even at that point. It was population size differences, which was the big factor. And so ultimately what happens is Roger Sherman of Connecticut, probably the most level-headed dude in the room, says, hey, both these plans make sense. Let's take them and combine them. We create a House of Representatives with representation based on state population, and we have a Senate based on equal representation, right? So the House of Representatives based on population, that's the reason why North Dakota gets 1 representative and the reason why California gets 50 some. Okay, they're the most populated state, right? But the New Jersey plan is the reason why North Dakota has 2 senators and California still only has 2 senators, right? So, and then they divide out the powers, right? The House gets some powers like starting impeachments and getting to decide when taxes are raised and some of those things. And the Senate gets the powers of ratifying treaties and holding impeachment trials and approving nominations for judges and cabinet level offices and things of that nature. So we ultimately start dividing the powers between the two houses, basically to make sure that neither house became more powerful. And then we have provisions that basically ensure that so a law can become a law, that bill, what it starts as, must pass through both houses of Congress, right? So that's ultimately, I mean, Congress in a nutshell. But Article 1 of the Constitution that discusses Congress, rightfully so, is the longest article of the Constitution. Like, it's not even comparable. I think the next longest article is probably Article 2 about the president, and that's still, there's not a ton there. So anyways, without further ado, then we will get into some of these things. I have a couple different documents here. I just got to find them. This is just some vocabulary, and I'll make sure I share this with you guys again too as well. And then the other document that I had pulled up is this guy here, and this is just the course guide. And so I want to start with the course guide, just because this is what I look at when I teach the class, is ultimately what is it that you guys need to know according to the AP board, which again, I think we've established that the AP board, the college board, they're kind of a bunch of jackals, but this is what I look at. So on a daily basis, when I'm teaching the class, as far as what are you required to know about the various topics. So let's just jump through Congress here a little bit, starting with the House of Representatives and the Senate, and just how they're broken down. And these are probably some things that we've already touched on. So one of the major learning objectives is for you to describe the different structures, powers, and functions of each House of Congress. Well, I feel like we've touched on the structure in the sense that the House is based on population, the Senate's not. Senate's based on equal representation. And so we say, okay, what's the essential knowledge for this objective? Again, the senators represent the entire state, whether the state likes them or not, as a whole, they're voted on by the entire state. Unlike the House, where members of the House represent members from certain districts. Now, North Dakota, we're kind of the wild card, right? Because how many congressional districts do we have in our state? Only one, right? Right. We have one congressional district, one member of the House. Okay. Districts do not affect the Senate. Senators represent the entire state. Okay. So again, that's a structural thing. So we've touched on that. Again, our House has been capped at 435 permanent members. Could that number change? Yes. What would it take? That's a great question here on this blizzardy Wednesday night. What would it take to change the permanent size of our House of Representatives?
Lots of people.
Well, yeah.
Amendment?
We would not need an amendment for it, but I like where your head's at.
Oh.
It would only take a law. Okay. It would only take a law because, read through, like I encourage you guys, read. If you look at Article 1, there's nothing mentioning a permanent size of the House. It just says that the House is based on population. Okay, great. Instead, there was a law passed in the 1920s, so almost 100 years ago, basically where I don't know how they came up with the number. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I know, but the number they came up with was 435. And so since 1929, I believe, with the Reapportionment Act of 1929, our House has been capped at 435 members. Now, since 1929, we've added U.S. states. We're still capped at 435 members. So if we wanted to change that permanent size, it would only take a law, which, again, you guys know a law is easy. I mean, laws are not easy to pass, but they're easier to pass than amendments, right? Because with a law, you need majority of the House, majority of the Senate, president's signature in most cases, boom, you have a law. With an amendment, professor, what do you need?
2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of both states. Boom, 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 boom.
Love it. And that's going to be recorded on YouTube forever, my man. I'm going to show that to my kids someday. Okay. Right. So laws are easier to pass. Now, I'm not saying they're easy in general, but they're easier because all you need is Congress and the president, which is sometimes more complicated, or oftentimes more complicated than what it should be. All right. So again, with that, our House, 435 members, that number could change. It would take a law. Senate, I mean, it's equal representation. Every state gets 2. That would take an amendment because that's listed in the Constitution. But anyways, this term constituencies, again, a constituent is a person represented by an official. So for example, everybody in North Dakota, we are Kelly Armstrong's constituents. We are John Hoeven's constituents. We are Kevin Kramer's constituents. And we're a unique state because we're small. But you go to California, if you live in District 12 of California, so that's like Nancy Pelosi's district, just throwing that out there. If you live in District 13, are you Nancy Pelosi's constituent?
No.
No, because she represents District 12, right? So that's where it becomes unique. And so these smaller states, North Dakotas, South Dakotas, Vermont, Delaware, Alaska, were unique because the constituents for the senators and the House are the same. That's not the same. That's not the case for most states. Okay. Looking at some structural things here, they talk about formality of debate. Remember, like when bills and things are debated, in which house of Congress do things normally move faster because they have to?
Representatives.
Yeah, by nature they are, because in the House, they serve a 2-year term. Anybody remember how long do senators serve?
6.
6 years, right? So the senators can drag their feet, whatever. Like they're there for 6 years. The House, they're constantly doing stuff, even though it doesn't feel like it or appear that they are because they have to. They only have 2 years, and 2 years is not a lot of time to get things done. So like in the House, everything is very tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. In the Senate, it's very tick tock, tick tock, right? Okay, so much slower moving. And again, because of the term differences, things don't move as fast, right? And we talk about coalitions, that would be like the groups of representatives combined with the president. In the House, they're changing relatively constantly because of the shorter terms, whereas in the Senate, like it's kind of, I don't want to call it mob rule because that's not what America is, even though it sometimes feels like that. But in the Senate, like people, they stick together for longer periods of time because they have to like each other more for a longer period of time, right? If that makes sense. All right, continuing on with that. Talking about enumerated and implied powers. So the enumerated powers, we also call them the express powers. If you have a pocket constitution with you, Maisie Jacobson, which I know you do, and maybe you don't, maybe you're shaking your head at me and like blushing. The enumerated powers are those that are listed in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, clauses 1 through 17, enumerated powers. Congress can tax, they can coin money, they can declare war, they can provide money for roads and post offices, right? You go through that list, those are the enumerated powers, the things that Congress can do because the Constitution says. When we talk about implied powers, those are powers that fall under what really important constitutional clause? Goes by 2 names. Implied
Necessary
powers.
and proper.
Necessary and proper is one name of the clause. What's the other one? It might be in your
Elastic.
waistband. Elastic, right? It allows Congress to stretch its powers, right? That, you know, we have more, right? We can do more because we have to carry out our functions, right? But things in Article 1, Section 8, clauses 1 through 17, enumerated powers, declaring war, coining money, taxing, yada, yada, yada. And then you have the wild card, right? The deuce is wild, where you have the elastic clause, Section 8, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. Congress can do whatever is necessary and proper to carry out its enumerated powers, which I know it's a weird way of doing it. And we talk about like the relationship between the states and the federal government and the F word, federalism. Like, does that elastic clause probably cause some beef between the states and the federal government or national government?
Oh yeah.
100%. 100% does, because it allows the national government to stretch its powers into like things like education, which that word is not used in the Constitution whatsoever. Marriage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like we could go down the list. Recreational drugs, you know, you name it. It doesn't like that. Elastic clause has allowed our government to stretch its powers, the national government, I should say. Okay, so keep that in mind. We will come back when we talk about FRQs. We'll talk about how to like cite the Constitution in an FRQ. There's a variety of ways you can do that. We're not going to worry about that for now because I want to continue on with Congress. So this next one is we're looking at policy making. So this is like how the bill becomes a law. All right. Kind of just looking through the essential knowledge, things that you have to know. Okay, we said, okay, by design, the different structures and powers and functions of the Senate and the House affect policy making, right? So like in the House, if we decide to raise revenue, that has to start in the House. But a bill can start in the Senate, right? It just depends on the subject matter. There's only a couple of cases. One of them being the raising of revenue and appropriation bill, which would be like raising money for something, where it has to start in the House. Okay. Like a declaration of war that can start in the House or the Senate. But appropriations of money, that's like the one specific thing where it has to start in the House, kind of like how treaty ratification has to happen in the Senate. Okay. So that's how we look at that when we're looking to talk about policies. The other thing with this too is we get into, and we'll come back to this one here that I'm dragging my cursor over. But we talk about how the House and the Senate, they're divided into these little groups. Standing, fill in the blank, standing, second word.
Committees.
Committees, very good. And those standing committees research different subjects related to legislation, right? So we have like a House Standing Committee on Agriculture. We have a Senate Standing Committee on Education, natural resources, you name it, right? There's the House has more because the House is bigger, but those standing committees is where kind of this whole policy making process starts, because what happens is at the start of each new congressional, session or term, I should say, every 2 years, committee memberships are divided up. If you guys followed that at all a couple months ago or last month, that becomes a pretty hot button issue, right? Deciding who's going to be on what committee, who's going to be the chair, so on and so forth, right? That's not something that happens easy, because those committees have a lot of power, especially like something like the Rules Committee in the House, because the Rules Committee in the House is ultimately, they decide when a bill is going to be debated, right? They get to make that rule. And so the Rules Committee becomes especially important in the House. But anyways, looking at some of these other things, talking about some of our Senate leader or our congressional leadership. So in the House of Representatives, the most powerful individual is the Speaker, right? The Speaker gets to assign bills to where they basically get to bring up when bills are going to be debated. Like the Speaker of the House has a lot of power. Per the Constitution, and this isn't meant to confuse you guys, but per the Constitution, I'm going to see if I can highlight, and I think I can. But per the Constitution, who is this person? Who is the president of the Senate? They also go by another title that you guys know much better, or you're much more familiar with. Who is the president?
Vice President.
It's the vice president, 100%. The vice president in the Senate, is it fair to say that they have less influence than the Speaker? Is that a fair statement?
For sure.
For sure. Because the vice president, for one, they're probably rarely ever in the Senate. And for two, they don't get to vote unless there is a
Tie.
Thank you. So again, the vice president, yeah, they're important, right? They can be the deciding vote. The Speaker has a lot more influence, 100%. There is another position. I know it's not on this particular page, but in the Senate, what they do is they elect a person to serve when the vice president isn't there. Does anybody remember their term? When the vice president can't serve, who is the president of the Senate? What's their title? And it's okay if you don't know it.
Senate Majority Leader?
Well, they're important too, but that's not the title we're looking for, right? Because we have majority party, minority party. Again, majority party would be the party that has more seats. Minority party, the party that doesn't have the majority. And then they have majority minority leaders. And those people they're important. I would say probably in the Senate, the most important person based on influence is probably the Senate majority leader. But the person who serves when the vice president is not there, their title is the president of the pro Latin. I know we don't. Yeah, president of the pro tempore. If I ask any of you, who's the president of the pro tempore right now? Nobody knows. I mean, I don't know without looking up. I know for a long time it was Orrin Hatch from Utah, but it's because you don't hear a lot about them, right? You hear about people like, the Mitch McConnells of the world and some of these people that, have been around forever. But understand we have majority leader, minority leader, majority whip, minority whip. The leaders, majority, minority leader, right? They are the representative for their party in that House of Congress. And then the whips are the people that, literally they crack the whip and get people to vote in a certain way. So keep that in mind, right? We talk about committee membership, or we talk about like party chairs. That's committee chairs. They're the people that head the standing committees. They hold a lot of influence there as well, in deciding who's going to be on committees, who's not, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Questions on that? I know we're going kind of quick here. Any questions on that? By the way, Taco, I just got a text from Jake Deutsch. It made my day. So, but Taco, real talk, dog. It's cold outside. Wear pants. Okay.
All right, man. All right.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's because I care about you. All right. All right. So we've kind of touched on this here already. I just want to scroll down, see here what we have. Okay, we have more on Congress, lots of Congress. Okay, we got to go quicker. But we talk about like this, how a bill becomes a law, and we said that in the House, it's the Rules Committee, right? They hold a lot of influence as to when bills are being heard and that type of thing. In the Senate, the way when they debate bills, it's different because in the Senate, they can literally talk bills to death. We call that a filibuster, which there was a question at ACK Olympics today, and I was sold that was the correct answer. It was the question where the answer was spiel.
We answered filibuster.
What's that?
That's what we put for our answer.
Did you? That makes
Yeah.
me so happy. Because in my mind, I was like filibuster. Then when she said spiel, I'm like, I guess that makes sense. But again, the filibuster, can a filibuster happen in the House? Short answer is
No.
No.
rules, right? People only get so long to talk. They establish a rule for debate. You get 90 seconds, you get 120 seconds, whatever that might be. There's a time. In the Senate, right? If they get the floor, they can talk for as long as they possibly want, as long as they stay standing and that type of thing. And the Senate actually has to vote. They actually have to vote for when they are going to end debate, I guess, or if they're going to limit, we call that cloture. Holds and unanimous consent. Again, those are just kind of methods of having to do with that debate process. You guys can read more about those later. I don't find those to be as important. We talk about Rules Committee, House Rules Committee. That's a big one. Committee of the Whole. Again, the House is 435 members. So when the House meets as the Committee of the Whole, the idea is that they're meeting as one large committee. Everybody, one room, one time. Let's debate. Okay. That's Committee of the Whole. Standing committees are limited in members. When the House meets as the Committee of the Whole, that's usually before they're voting on a particular bill, and you have the masses there all at once. Okay, that's all Committee of the Whole is. When they meet as the Committee of the Whole, it means that they're probably getting very close to voting on some sort of bill. And a discharge petition, that's basically a call for a bill to be released from committee for a vote. Okay, so a discharge petition, tongue twister. That's something that can kind of speed up this lawmaking process. If there's a discharge petition that's issued, it means that a bill basically has to come to the floor of the House for large group debate and ultimately a vote. All right, questions on that? No? All right, continuing on. We said one of the specific powers of the Senate that has to deal with treaty ratification. Again, a treaty is an official agreement between two or more nations. The United States has involved a lot of them. That has to be approved by the Senate. That's in the Constitution. Okay. And then the confirmation role of the Senate. So senators, who do they confirm? What are some of the offices that the U.S. Senate confirms?
Cabinet officials and Supreme Court justices.
Yep. High-ranking bureaucrats, the cabinet officials, federal judges. So not just Supreme Court judges, but federal judges in general. They have to be confirmed, right? Because those individuals, a part of the reason for that too is there's no qualification listed for those people. Like if Taco gets the call tomorrow and President Biden wants to nominate him for some sort of judgeship, he can do that because there's nothing in there about qualifications. I mean, Taco, you have a professional pasta maker. He's got a pretty creative mind. He's done some DoorDash. He doesn't wear pants when it's 30 below zero outside, right? Maybe I want that guy I want him to serve as a federal judge.
I'd want him to.
I'm sure you are. There's a good pay raise with that too there, my man. Pays a lot better than DoorDash or the pasta plant. But anywho, like that could happen. Now, is Taco going to get confirmed by the Senate? Probably not. However, it could happen, right? It's hypothetical. Now, would it happen? Probably not. Very unlikely, but technically it could. He just has to prove his qualifications to the Senate at that point, which he could just answer with, I have a pretty sweet nickname. I'm known as the Taco Cat. I have boulder shoulders, et cetera, et cetera. So again, keep that in mind. Questions on some of these things? Anything? Does a lot of this at least sound somewhat familiar? A little bit familiar?
Yeah.
50-50. Okay, I'll take it. All right, let's continue on then. So this deals a lot with budget. Again, Congress, we talked about monetary and fiscal policy in class. Which one does Congress determine? Monetary or fiscal?
Fiscal.
Fiscal, right? And so fiscal matters are like issues having to do with taxes, how entitlement programs are going to be funded, so on and so forth. Okay. Monetary, I'm going to pick on you, Professor, because I feel like you probably know the answer. Who determines monetary policy then?
The Federal Reserve.
That's it, right? And monetary policy would be like interest, inflation, things of that nature. Fiscal is taxes and how government money is being spent. Okay. And so again, it's a combination of Congress and the president that comes up with the budget. If you remember the budget, there's certain things that have to be funded. We call those entitlements. What are some examples of entitlements? They have to be, they're mandatory areas of spending. They have to be funded year after year after year. What are some examples?
Medicare, Medicaid.
Medicare, Medicaid. Yep. Have to be funded by law. What's another one?
Social Security fall in there?
Yep. Social Security is a big one. Okay.
Military.
What's that?
Military.
No, no. And that's fair that you say that. I'm happy you said that because that'll bring us to the next talking point. But Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Another thing, we got 10 minutes here, so we're going to kind of kick her down here a little bit. Said Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We have to pay the interest on our loans to ourselves. Okay, because the United States, we're trillions of dollars in debt. So we have to make our interest payments. And that is more, we have to pay our government officials. Yeah, so they get paid. And that's all mandatory. It has to be paid for. Like members of Congress, the president, their salaries are guaranteed, right? It's mandatory spending. Their benefits as well, which I know you're like, really? Yes. The answer is yes. But something like the military, like the United States, like our military is super well funded, right? The only thing in the United States that's more well funded than our military is Social Security. Do we have to spend the amount of money that we spend on our military? The simple answer to that is
No.
no. We don't have to. And so the military becomes, I know, like, and I feel like the AP people, because again, they're sitting in their mother's basements right now, covered in Cheeto dust, just researching everything AP related to make your lives miserable. I am not covered in Cheeto dust, by the way, right now. I haven't ate yet, so there is that. But we talk about the military. If we didn't want to have one, we wouldn't technically have to, but obviously it'd be foolish for us not to. So, but we don't have to fund it the way we fund it. We don't have to. There's nothing saying that X amount of the budget has to be spent on the military. There's not even a law, right? Social Security, there's a law, has to be paid for. Medicare, Medicaid, there's a law. And those things like, Social Security has been around for almost 100 years now, right? It's a Great Depression issue. Medicare, Medicaid's in the 1960s. Those are just things like until there's something that happens, which you bet there won't be, because can you think like, if the US government wanted to make as many people as mad as possible, which I feel like they try to do that every day anyways, but they want to make a lot of people really mad. If they started taking money out of Social Security or started saying we don't have to spend as much on Social Security, can you imagine how that would make a large portion of our baby boomers right now, like my parents and probably like your grandparents? Can you even imagine how upset that would make them? It'd be crazy, right? They're not going to do that. The Republicans and Democrats, they always talk all the time about doing different things, Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. I just don't see it changing. I mean, not anytime soon, at least. But the last time I said that I don't see something changing, then we had a COVID pandemic. So that's where we're at. All right. Questions on this first kind of objective here. Questions there. We talk about budget surplus, simply meaning you have more money than what you have in the bank at the end of the year. Budget deficit. And deficit spending, you're spending money that you don't have. Going into debt has been a common theme through the United States for the past many, many of years. Let's talk about pork then. Pork and log rolling. I'm more of a beef guy myself, as I know you are too, Professor. But I don't discriminate. I like a little pork here and there. And then log rolling. So does anybody remember what pork barrel legislation is?
Was that like, I'll pass this law or whatever as long as I get past my 2 or 3 other side things that I wanted to go along with?
Yeah, it's similar. So so pork barrel spending or pork barrel legislation and log rolling, they kind of go hand in hand. They're like peanut butter and jelly. So pork then, Micah, would be like the things that are included, the extras that might not fit, that, okay, we're going to have this new infrastructure bill, but to get the California representative from whatever district to vote yes on this, we're going to include some money in their district for public education, which might not have much to do with an infrastructure bill, but we want to get that vote. So we're going to include something, right? So the pork is the extras. Okay. So you describe that. It's like the stuff that doesn't really fit, but it gets included. Log rolling then would be like the exchange of favors. Like, hey, I will vote for your bill if you do this, or if you vote for my bill, I'll vote for your bill, right? That's log rolling. Okay. It happens all the time in Congress. It's just what it is to get votes, because these parties, right? They have campaign donors to make happy. They have parties to make happy. It's just kind of the unfortunate part of politics, but that's exactly what it is. It's politics. Okay. Questions there. Got about 5 minutes left here. Let's see what we have. Last one here, I think, having to do with Congress. Yeah. All right. Super. So we talk about more about behaviors. The first one here we'll talk about is I think negotiation and compromise are pretty straightforward. Anybody remember what's gridlock?
Our Congress acts like a bunch of 5-year-olds who can't decide on anything and won't, give an inch.
Right. Yeah. I mean, gridlock could refer to like I don't know if like thinking in chess terms, like a stalemate. It could be like stalling. It could be like they just can't get along. The other thing with gridlock too is, who is Congress very reliant on to accomplish their tasks? There's one person. If Congress wants, yeah, it's the president, right? So like if there's, difference of opinions between members of Congress and the president, that leads to gridlock too. But it's basically when they can't do anything because people aren't willing to budge. And so that's like where negotiation, compromise, log rolling, and pork spending or pork barrel legislation come in. Okay. Getting into gerrymandering, we've talked Shaw versus Reno and Baker v. Carr. Does gerrymandering affect the House or the Senate?
House.
Affects the House. Doesn't really have much of a role in the Senate because, again, districts and such. Again, the entire idea behind gerrymandering is to have certain districts with certain majority of members so that certain things can pass. Both parties do it. Supreme Court's been all over the board on what can be, when gerrymander can happen, when it can't. Basically, the only thing our Supreme Court has said about gerrymandering, or the only things, is that congressional districts have to be mostly equal in population. They cannot be based solely on race. Congressional districts have to be contiguous or one piece. But like political gerrymandering, they're kind of like, they don't want to touch it. Okay. And so that's Baker v. Carr, Shaw versus Reno, right? Baker v. Carr is where it happens, saying that all districts have to be, mostly equal in population size or substantially equal. And then Shaw versus Reno is the case where districts cannot be drawn based solely on race. Okay. Divided government. What's divided government? It's when we have a majority of Congress that's one party and a president who is the other. Okay. So if we have a majority Democrat House, majority Democrat Senate, and a Republican president, we have divided government. Okay. It's when you don't have just one party straight through, which, you think it wasn't so long ago. It was within the past year here, a couple of years. You had Democrat majority House, Democrat majority Senate, Democrat president. I don't know. You guys could be the judges there on how much they got done. But anywho, so that's divided government. We start talking about ratios of party members and that type of thing. Okay. Lame duck presidents. Those are those who are on their way out. Okay. It's like when we have a president who's on his last term or his last year of office. So we call the lame duck. Okay. I don't know why they call him that, but that's what they call him. And then the last thing here, just getting more into terminology with members of Congress. Again, Congress, we live in a republic. The job of Congress is to represent the people. Okay. To represent their delegates, their constituents. And so we have 3 models of behavior. We have what's called the delegate model. Delegate model is when Congress acts in a way whose best interests do they have in mind?
The people's.
Yeah, the people they represent. They're going to do what the people who voted them, they're going to do what they want. What's trustee then?
They make like critical thinking decisions, but they might go a little bit back and forth. They're not like always just straight down the line.
Yeah, kind of, sort of.
Is that that one?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. So trustee would be when they act like on what they believe is right. Okay. Like, you know, our politicians, Democrat, Republican, whatever, these people get elected to office. Even though this is probably going to ruffle a few feathers when I say this, they're all relatively intelligent because they have to be, right? So when they make a decision, when they vote on a law in a certain way, because like, I just disagree with this for whatever reason, whether it's morally, economically, whatever, that's like the trustee model. So even though it might go against what the people, what their delegates ultimately want, it's them acting what they on the way they believe is right. Okay. And then Politico is kind of the combination of these two. And then with Politico, you keep in mind too, like what the party wants, Democrat, Republican, right? They give a lot of money to their politicians to get reelected and that type of thing. Okay. Questions on any of that. And again, we can review all that again. We have a number of more times where we can review. Meeting's going to end here in a second. If you have questions, email them to me. If you have any requests for next week, send those my way. Okay. You guys have a good night. See you virtually tomorrow. Some of you make good choices. Taco, wear pants. Still a big Jake Deutsch guy. Okay. Have a good night, everybody.
See you later, Mr. Earl.
See ya.